Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Alphabetical Fugazi, the only podcast that devotes an episode each to discussing every song in the band's catalog, from Fuga A to Fuga Z. I'm your host, Ian James Wright, and joining me today to discuss Bulldog Front, from 13 songs originally from the first self-titled EP in 1988, is the founder of Sell the Heart Records, Andy Pohl. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ian. Thank you so much. Yeah, stoked to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We first got in touch because, to get right to it, your label, Sell the Heart Records, there's a tribute record, a tribute to Fugazi, called Everybody Wants Somewhere. So let's just talk about that first, if you want to.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about the record.
Yeah, so, Fugazi's been a band that I've just held like so much love and, respect for since, junior high, and, easily one of my favorite bands of all time. I've kept up with them, throughout their entire career, and, just have so much respect, and like they've influenced me so greatly. And I wanted to, it's an album that I wanted to put together for a long time, but never really just had like the means to do so. And, after Sell the Heart had been around for a few years, I started kind of thinking a little bit more about it. And, I ended up just reaching out to some friends of mine that are in bands and saying, hey, like, I have this idea, and like, what do you think about it? And everyone was just like, dude, yes, you should totally do this. Like, why haven't you done this before? And, so after, cause initially I gotta say, like, I was a little intimidated by the idea of doing it because, not to sound like too much of a fanboy, but I really love this band, and like, I love everything that they stand for. And, I wanted to make sure that if I was to do it, that it would be done with like a high degree of integrity, and like, wouldn't just be like, oh, we're going to do this comp that's going to be a bunch of covers. And, I wanted to be very thoughtful. I wanted it to have like a little bit more of a unique approach to it. And, I think it was good that I waited a little while, as opposed to just rushing out and doing it as a flash of the pan, like, oh, we're just going to get a bunch of bands and cover Fugazi. But the end result, I'm super happy with. I mean, every band and artist that was a part of it just put such a really cool cover together, many of which are extreme. I wouldn't necessarily call them extreme, but, variations on what you'd think Fugazi is all about. Like, you've got some like kind of electronic, electronic synthy kind of vibes. You've got a few that are a little bit more straightforward. I just think it's really come together really well. And, with the mission of using the proceeds that we raise from the sale of it to go towards local nonprofits as like a piece of what it's all about. I mean, that's, it makes part of the process of doing it even better. And like the fact that we've been able to put some of that money into the community is really, I think, at the heart and soul of like what that band is all about. So it's been really fun. It's been great.
Yeah, I had a lot of the same concerns as you're describing starting this podcast project. Like, so I get
Right.
that. There's a lot of pressure when it comes to a band we love like this to get it right. Are there, like, if listeners want to, just have a little sample, are there a couple of songs that you would point out in particular? Like, hey, go check this one out.
Yeah, from the tribute album, I mean, I really don't want to like point out any one in terms of like my favorites or anything like that, because I really do think that all of them are like unique and like special in their own way. Because, as people and as artists that respect the band, like, it was really great to know that so many of them were like, oh yeah, like I want to be a part of this. Like, it's not just, oh, okay, I'll take you up on that offer. It was more like, no, this is going to be awesome. Like, I really want to do this. So, but if there were a few that I really, I guess could point to that I think were really kind of unique. Jonah Matranga did one that I thought was really, really cool. He did Suggestion. And then the band Narboots did a version on I'm So Tired that was really, really cool. Just so out there and so different. And then, I mean, it was really cool to get Screw 32 to be a part of it, because they were a band that I was really, really into back in my earlier years in high school and stuff. And, I had a lot of respect for them as well. And, I had heard that they had recently gotten back together and were starting to do some shows and stuff. And so I just kind of blindly reached out to them and said, hey, like, I'm doing this thing. I like your band. Do you want to do this? And they're like, yes, we're doing it. And we already know which song we're doing. I'm like, okay. So that was that. And then, I mean, it turns out that, it's the only song that, at least that I'm aware of, that they ended up recording when they got back together for like their brief reunion. So that's kind of special to me too, because that's another band, like I said, that I had a lot of respect for and admiration for back in the day. So that was really cool to be a part of that. But, it was really cool to get a contribution from like No Knife. The band White Murder from LA did a great job. My buddy Tony Pennington did a really, really cool version of the song that he did. And then, just like, it's kind of all over the map.
And you're in the band Snipers, right?
Yeah. So my band, one of the bands that I was in for many years called Snipers, we did Arpeggiator, which was kind of fitting because we're an instrumental band. And, it was a song that I always kind of like focused on a lot from that album. It was kind of like one of the ones that really stood out to me. And that's one of those things about Fugazi that I always kind of liked, was that, they didn't mind just throwing an instrumental track onto their albums, kind of like in like a neat kind of twist. You're like, oh, this is just instrumental. That's pretty cool,
Yeah, like, if anything, that's understating it. Instrumentals once in a while is a core part of what I think about when I think about Fugazi and who they were and how they did things.
Absolutely.
It was like essential.
Yeah, like, I mean, it was honestly like, I remember when I heard Sweet and Low for the first time, I was like, wow, there's no lyrics to this. Like, are there going to be lyrics? There aren't. Okay. And then, but you come back to it because you're like, dude, it's a really good song. Like, and I mean, like, back then, the only instrumental music that I was really even kind of aware of was like classical or jazz or, something in that vein. Like, I didn't just listen to instrumental music. Like, I had no concept of like post rock or, ambient rock or anything like that. So they were in a lot of ways like the first band kind of within that kind of vibe that I even knew about, so like that goes to show just how much of an influence they had on me,
Yeah, I think you guys did a bang up cover of Arpeggiator. I really liked it. And listeners who remember our Arpeggiator episode will recall that I gave it 5 stars. It's really one of my favorite Fugazi songs. You guys did a great job. It's a very faithful cover, but then it's got some like lovely ambient guitar, sort of like post-rock guitar sounds over the top. Just sounds really nice. So congrats on that one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was an interesting song to try to approach because, it's pretty well. I mean, a lot of Fugazi stuff is like excellently put together, but like that song in particular, because it's just kind of like this train that keeps kind of like chugging along. You're like, okay, like this is the vibe of the song. Like, I think that you probably could change it up pretty interestingly. I mean, obviously it could be done, but I just felt like, dude, like, let's just take it for what it is and just add our twist to it. And that's exactly what we did, was we just kind of added a little bit more of like a spaciness and, some reverb and a little bit more delay. And, I appreciate that you liked it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Apart from Fugazi's influence on you as a musician, I was just curious about, you as the founder of a record label. I'd have to assume that Ian and Discord influenced you somewhat in that regard too.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. 100%. I mean, when you think about the model of what an independent record label kind of looks like, Discord is clearly one of those labels that just kind of, shone the way for everyone, you know. And I mean, it's not like they were the first one, you know, by any stretch. I mean, you know, there were plenty of independent labels around for decades, you know, but you know, especially in regards to like the punk rock scene and that, I mean, you can point to like Discord, you can point to like Alternative Tentacles, there's like Touch and Go, there's, you know, Tang, and, you know, so many. But, you know, I think because, I mean, one of the things about Discord that I think really helped to elevate them was that obviously, you know, they had the Minor Threat and, you know, Fugazi, you know, connection, but, you know, they really wanted to like show what their scene was doing, you know, and like really emphasize like, hey, like this is like us, like this is what we're doing, and like, you know, we're gonna do it our way. We're not gonna like, you know, try to reach out and like get like any funding from like a bigger company like what Epitaph and like some of these other ones have done with like major distribution and all that stuff. And that's fine, you know. I mean, kudos to them for being able to do that. I mean, I've had plenty of Epitaph records too, but and I, you know, I have a lot of respect for Gurewitz and all those guys too. But you know, in terms of like keeping things within like their own grasp, like that's a pretty important thing to be able to do. And like, I think that's a huge piece of what those guys stood for. And, you know, I think that matters in a lot of ways because, you know, you then have the say over your own destiny. You don't have to worry about somebody else having the opportunity to kind of direct where things are going to go.
Yeah, it's such an interesting label. It's different in so many ways from other record labels. I was just thinking because I always remember, you know, you'd see some people sort of rep their fandom of a record label like the same way they would a band. Like, oh, I like, you know, Merge Records, I like whatever. And it's, when you think about it, it's like a little weird. It's like, yeah, okay, maybe you respect the, you know, the tastes of the people who sign the artists they choose to sign or whatever, but it's still a little nebulous in terms of like a thing. Whereas Discord it's very, you know, it's like, this is what's happening in our scene in Washington, D.C. You can come to the label, pick any act, and you'll get a slice of what's happening in that. So it crystallizes an idea in a way that a lot of labels don't, and that's pretty cool.
Well, and I think that part of it too is that, you know, with regards to wanting to like really stay centered around like their world, you know, it makes it a little bit more manageable, I think, you know, because, you know, it's only a few people, you know, doing that work, you know. So, I mean, I personally don't know how many people work for Discord Records. I'm assuming at like the peak, it was probably at least a dozen or so, but I imagine that things have changed over the years, you know, because of the way that, you know, people consume music now, and they're probably not turning out as many units as they used to, like maybe back in like the late 90s or something like that. But you know, anyway, when you've got a smaller footprint to like physical footprint to work with, I think it makes it more manageable for the smaller amount of people that are working with it.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that it's sort of convenient the way the purview of the label dovetails with the fact that, like, hey, it's kind of easier to do it that way. Like, we're not going to sell a bunch of merchandise. We're not going to deal with bands from all over the world. We're going to sell records from bands from Washington, D.C. So it's convenient that it's just it's both conceptually cool but also kind of easier.
Right. And, you know, I think at the time, especially like that's just like a model that worked, you know. And like nowadays we have, you know, the internet, and we have so many different ways to get in touch with people that, you know, if Discord was starting right now, like it'd be, I'm, you know, I don't want to assume anything, but I would assume that if Discord were starting today under the same principle, like they'd easily be able to work with like a band in Australia,
right,
in the same capacity, you know, versus, you know, the early 80s, you know.
So today we are talking about Bulldog Front. It's one of the two early Fugazi songs. I sort of think this is interesting to look at when paired with Waiting Room, right? It's like the 1-2 punch that starts off the Fugazi catalog. And it's interesting to look at that way. It's almost like presenting really who they are in some ways. Like, we have two lead singers, here they are, here's Ian singing on the first track. Here's Guy singing on the second track. And then in each one of those songs, you have the other one doing sort of backups, right? On this one, Ian's doing the "You Want to Figure It Out" backing vocals. So it's like a little tiny yin yang to start off the Fugazi catalog.
Right.
So that's pretty interesting. So you elected to talk about Bulldog Front. What's the first angle you want to talk about in this song?
Well, it's one of those songs. I mean, first of all, 13 Songs is my favorite Fugazi record. If I had to pick one, I mean, it kind of go back and forth between that one and In on the Kill Taker, but it was one of those songs that really stood out to me upon like my first couple of listens through the album. I mean, everyone knows Waiting Room, obviously, and that's the one that kind of, I think a lot of people get introduced to first, but that was certainly the first song that I got introduced to too. But, when going through that album, Bulldog Front was one that really like stood out to me. And like, it had like a certain level of like catchiness to it that I think was easily like, oh, like you want to figure it out, like you just kind of like latch onto it pretty easily, because it's got like that, like, yeah, I'm going to sing along to this, like no problem. And not a lot of Fugazi songs do that, like with I think the intention, of like having that sing along part. But I guess it depends on like what angle you're coming from. But after having like digested it quite a bit, I mean, it is like a song that just has a lot of, I mean, like a lot of them do, like they have a lot, it has like a ton of impact and like it resonates on a lot of different levels. I think that you can kind of unwrap it in a lot of different ways too. I mean, is it talking about like racism? Is it talking about like machoism? Is it talking about like just, ego in general? Like what's really like at the bottom of what they're talking about? And it's just got a lot of layers,
Yeah. The only, speaking about the lyrics, I think the only thing I can say for sure is, it presents the lyrics in a very confrontational sort of language, right?
Sure.
It's sort of like, it's almost like a, we'll kick your ass song. It's like Fugazi's "We Will Rock You," you want to figure it out, we'll throw down. Now, of course, you can read that combative attitude in a lot of ways, like, I am opposed to you, like I will fight you physically. You could think of it like, we will expose your falsity, your hypocrisy. Or, I mean, you could even read it as, an inner conflict, right? Reassessing your own attitude in the face of what have you. So, yeah, it's one of those interestingly ambiguous songs, but definitely combative up front.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it has a level of energy that, like, I mean, it's hard to know because like I haven't really had a chance to like hear or see any kind of like information from them directly about the song to know where their head was at. Like you could almost kind of feel like, oh, it's like ironic, like they're taking the part of like that macho person. It's like, yeah, well, we'll throw down and like, fuck you up, like that kind of thing. And you're like, well, that's not really them. Like they're taking the role of like the person who's the aggressor, but maybe, I mean, that also, like you said, like could very well just be like, no, we're actually just going to stand our ground. Like we're going to go ahead and not let you like come up and show up with this kind of like fucked up attitude without a fight,
Right.
And I if things that I know about like Ian and Guy and like the guys from that scene, like it's not like they, were like in a space where they were like, oh, like we're going to go and like get into a bunch of fights with people. But I'm pretty sure that like they were probably ready to throw down if they needed to, because shit, like it was the 1980s in Washington, D.C., I mean, and they were kids, so kids get into scuffles and shit all the time, and then you get older and you walk away from that shit and you evolve a bit. So, things change for whatever reason. But, the truth is, it's like sometimes you have to defend yourself, and like that's true, and like whether or not that's about this or not, like I don't know for sure, but I think to your point, like, yeah, like it absolutely could be about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's they never struck me as guys who were ever, going out picking fights, but they had a lot of bones to pick with a lot of different people, and were very vocal about it. So yeah, I imagine like they're prepared to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, because I mean, if you kind of walk your way through the lyrics, like it strikes me as like a song that's basically trying to say something along the lines of like, hey man, like you're presenting either a worldview or a mentality that is old and tired and weak, and it's time for you to wake up to the reality of like the way things are now.
Right.
Like it definitely strikes me as like a, hey man, like you're old news. It's time to move on. Let the younger generation kind of move forward with this. And if you resist us, if you try to like get in our way, like we're going to push you aside, and like kind of like revolutionary in a way without like being so blatantly like, hey, like we're going to fuck you up, like that kind of thing, Yeah.
That's so funny that you put it that way. Because, when you say that, it reminds me of course, Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are A-Changin'."
Sure.
And, as I was listening to this song, something that leapt out to me is the delivery of the line, "Let's knock and check to see if there's somebody home." The delivery is so Dylan. Did you notice that? He's like, "Let's knock and check to see if there's somebody home." It's like, it's so Dylan.
For sure. Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm sure that there's plenty of nods to Dylan, in their music.
Well, yeah, that also got me looking at the line in particular. So it's, I guess, 4 lines. He says, "But I would never say you act without precision or care, but it's all attention to armor, to the armor you wear so well." And I was like, that kind of reminds me of Dylan too, which is like at least early Bob Dylan songs. I feel like he would do this thing. It's weird that I can't think of an exact example, but he would do this thing where he's like, I'm not saying, X bad thing about you, but I am saying this bad thing about you. And he did it to kind of funny effect. And like those lines sort of remind me of that. And it's an angle that I never, in all my listening to Fugazi, I never considered before. Like, is he like a huge Bob Dylan guy? I don't know. I have to apply this framework to my listening to his songs in the future.
Oh, sure. Like, I mean, I certainly wouldn't put in past like either one of them to take a lot of influence from Dylan. I mean, like me personally, like I've never really been like a huge Bob Dylan fan, and a lot of that honestly is just because I don't spend a lot of time listening to Bob Dylan. So I can't really speak to that too much, but being from the time and place that they were at, I wouldn't put it past them to have been influenced by, somebody as prolific as Bob Dylan,
sure.
Before. Yeah.
Talking more about Guy's songwriting proclivities, I thought I'd call out first of all, to get this out of the way, this is almost certainly the only song that ever began with the word ahistorical, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I can't. I mean, for a long time, I didn't even know what he said, because I was just like, what does he say in there? Like, I don't even know what that is. That a word? Or is that like many words?
Right.
Like I thought maybe like it's like something it's cool or something like that. Like, like it's just hard to know. And then like you finally read the lyrics, you're like, oh, ahistorical.
Yeah.
What does that mean? So yeah.
But what I was gonna say is that something that I had picked up from Guy's larger body of lyrics is the line where he says, "It's time to harvest the crust from your eyes." It's like, oh, gross. And it's like Guy has a way of writing these sort of uncomfortable body imagery lines. I mean, he does it elsewhere in this song too. He's like, he's conjures this image of like cannibalism, right? You've eaten your own, lips flecked, mouth specked. You strip the skin right off the bone. But he does it in a lot of other songs too, writing these lines that make you feel sort of uncomfortable. That's a nice hallmark of his.
Yeah. I mean, like between the way that he presents his lyrics, the way that Ian does, like it makes for this like kind of dance you have to do with your brain, because you're just like, okay, like, is this going to take a dark turn or not? So because Guy's lyrics definitely are a lot more like dynamic in that way. You know, it's not to say that Ian like doesn't present anything like dark, but like in my like experience listening to the songs that like Guy is like the singer and the main writer, like it definitely makes for a darker imagery, you know.
Speaking of dark imagery, I only did a tiny bit of research for this episode, which is to look up a little bit about bulldogs. That's sort of dark too. So the bulldog was initially, so there used to be this, you know, sport, quote unquote, called bull baiting, which is where they would get a bull, they would tether it to a stake, and then set a bunch of dogs on it, right? Like the most vicious dogs they could find, and sort of place bets on which dog would like eventually wear out and immobilize the bull by like latching onto its snout or something and pulling it down.
Wow.
So really vicious sounding, but you know, of course, enough iterations of this resulted in these really ferocious and savage breeds of dogs, and that's where the bulldog originally came from. And now since then, I mean, I don't want to be like an anti-bulldog person, but you know, I guess dog breeders have really tried to breed out the meanness of the breeds since bull baiting was outlawed. But that's sort of interesting. It gives you a little perspective on the metaphorical possibilities of what a bulldog is. It's just like a real savage, ferocious, stubborn creature.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Another thing, I want to present this as something that probably is not a factor in the songwriting, but is a possibility that's interesting, which is that the bulldog is the mascot of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay. Yeah, actually. Yeah, wow. I never even thought about that. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, part of me wondered, it was like, I wonder if Guy wrote this after some asshole from Georgetown was getting in his face about something. Like, it's probably not, but it's interesting to think about.
Well, yeah, it's, you know, it's hard to know much about the mindset of a person in that scene back then without having been there. I'm like, you know, I know some folks that, you know, I've had great discussions with about, like, especially the Bay Area scene, like way back in like the mid 80s. Cause you know, I'm a little too young to have like really been like in that at that time. And, you know, everything that they say points to the fact that it was much different with respect to it's like people actually fought a lot. Like there were lots and lots of scuffles, and it was because of like, you know, you had these hicks, you had jocks, you had like these tribes, like there was like this tribalism going on amongst the different peers and the cliques in school, you know, and whether or not it was high school or junior high or even trickled into college, like I think because, you know, like your social scene was so like relevant and so important. It was like you wore that like a badge, you know, and I think that going to beat up on like the weird queer or punk kids, you know, was like yeah, man, like totally, we're gonna totally fuck up these fucking punks, you know,
yeah,
like it's like some trope that you see out of like a 1980s like, you know, comedy, but there's something to that, you know. I mean, that shit was real to a degree, so. You know, I actually wouldn't put it past that to be part of the reason for these lyrics. You know, it's like, hey man, like you're just some kind of macho bro who's getting in my face and like spitting this old tired bullshit. And guess what, dude? I'm not moving. Like I've got plenty of fucking people backing me up here. And like, you ready? Are you ready for this? You know, like, yeah.
I think my favorite line, it's time, like basically says it's time to rage and define ourselves against your line. I want to say for people, like for young people who get into punk, it's something that punk helps them with, which is to define themselves. I mean, it's not unique to kids who get into punk music to be at a loss for what their identity is at all. But it presents an interesting way to help you gain something. Like maybe you're confused about who you are, or you're confused about what you're supposed to do, what your thing is. But something you can always do is define yourself against something that you know is not right, that you know sucks. And, you know, that's something that Fugazi and a lot of other punk bands helped with. They pointed out lots of problems in society, lots of injustices, and would say, look, here's the problem. If you're looking for a sort of purpose, an identity, be against this, because this is happening and this is not right. And I think it's not only a sort of teenage struggle for identity. I think that continues to be valid throughout life. I'm thinking here about current events, and there's this thing you hear a lot of people say, which is, if their preferred political candidates did not say win the primaries, and therefore they've decided they're not going to vote, as if they sort of have an attitude of like, well, you need to vote for something that is positive in form, right? You can't just vote against something. And I kind of think that's nonsense. I always have. Like, it's voting against something is just as noble as anything else, as any other reason for voting, right? Like, think of the archetype of the knight that slays the dragon, right?
Sure.
Why is he a hero? He's not a hero because he's going around the kingdom like laying down railroad or like creating some kind of infrastructure. He's a hero because he identified the most evil shit that's happening in the kingdom, and he like sets his sights on it and he takes it out at at great risk to his own life. So that's like a hero who's entirely defined by his negation of something negative. And it's like one of the classic hero archetypes that we have. So yeah, I just think like that's one of the political stances that I think Fugazi has influenced in me, which is don't be too picky. Vote to affect the least evil you possibly can at any given opportunity. And that's something that's been on my mind with current events.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's something that I feel that if you listen to conversations that, like, as particularly because Ian, I think, is the one that they tend to gravitate to the most in terms of like discussion and conversation and interviews and whatnot. But a lot of what I get from the way that he talks about politics and whether or not it's current or the 1980s or whatever is like kind of pointing to like what you're talking about with, it's like, listen, like nothing is perfect. Nothing will ever be perfect. We're never going to get every single check mark or checkbox checked. It's not going to happen, So you got to put the best foot forward and make the most positive change that you can, kind of like what you're talking about with, it's like try to do the most good while you can and eliminate the most evil in the process. And you're never going to get it 100% right. It's just not going to happen, So
yeah, that's no reason to say like fuck it all. It's
well, right, yeah. It's like you can't be apathetic, but you can't not do nothing, So you like. Because apathy is easy. It's very easy to just be like, fuck it. I'm not doing it. I'm not voting. Like, voting doesn't matter. Blah, 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 blah. That's, in a lot of ways, I mean, I know I'm probably going to get, like, some shit for this, but it's like, dude, it's a coward's move, dude. It's like, dude, fucking vote, dude. It's the easiest, simplest, freest thing to do, and, like, not everyone gets to do it, So do it, if anything, because, like, somebody else doesn't get to or something. I don't know. But yeah, this song could easily point to so many different ways of looking at like either side of the aisle, whether or not you are a staunch conservative, right wing, person who says, you know what, I'm sick of the liberal agenda. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of them trying to do something. We're going to throw down on this, or, taking the other side of the coin, which is, to be honest, where I tend to lie is more like the liberal side and like a little bit more progressive. It's like, listen, like old white men who happen to be rich, typically, it's like, we're kind of sick of you running the show. And, like, guess what? Like, we're trying to make a movement towards more of a progressive, younger way of doing things. And that's going to include people of color. It's going to include people of different genders and, trans people and queer people and, people from other countries who are immigrants. And that's what we're going to do. So how are you going to stand in the way? And like, we're going to fight you every step of the way. And in regards to like voting and stuff, it's like, yeah, like there's issues that, the left has, with like trying to fight every single battle and trying to win every single battle. But, I think it's getting better. And, hopefully, songs like this can kind of be a catalyst to kind of solidify that a little bit more and like, get it a little bit more streamlined. But, you just can't win them all.
Yeah, we can only hope.
Yeah, we can only hope.
This is not a song that's getting to, it's not going to have one of those revivals where people vote it to the top of the charts, so hopefully someone comes along and starts to use their voice to say something similar. That would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, like I could easily see that this song was like a reaction to like Reagan,
right?
Because at the time it's like, hey man, like, he's like, you walk through the lyrics, like, hey, like we're gonna rise up, we're gonna like stand against everything that you're saying, like we're ready to fucking take you on, you came up like, the whole Bulldog Front idea. It's like, Reagan was particularly looked at as like this tough president, right? Especially if you pitted up against Carter, who was viewed as a weak president, right? So Carter was like, yeah, like, he kind of negotiated with terrorists. So it's like, you know what? I'm Reagan. Fuck terrorists. And like, tear down this wall, like blah, blah, blah. And he had like this total like macho vibe to him. And so, he also, definitely did not stand up for people of color. He did not stand up for, people during the AIDS epidemic, until one of his friends, was turned out to have it, and like, everyone's like, dude, fuck this guy. Like, fuck this asshole, this macho fucking cowboy asshole,
Absolutely. I was just thinking how like, I like how both from you and from me, this episode is probably the highest profanity count of any I've recorded yet. I think that's part of the nature of the lyrics of this song. It just sort of makes you want to complain in vociferous terms about your bugbears.
yeah, and like, and I don't mean to be that guy with like a sailor mouth. I know that depending on which way you look at it, like profanity either can elevate a conversation or it can like make it like lowbrow and bad. But honestly, man, I don't give a shit. So
there are no elementary schoolers listening to this podcast of that, I'm sure. So
yes.
Don't have to be too concerned about it.
No, it's fine.
Kids don't care about our old man punk music.
Yeah, it's fine. It's true.
We got off on talking about lyrics, sort of blew right past the like sonic qualities of this song. Do you have anything you wanted to say about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, as somebody who has, taken a little bit of time to study the guitar work, the drumming, the bass playing. I mean, I've played bass before. I'm a huge fan of Brendan and Joe's work as the rhythm section in Fugazi, and like, the two guitar approach that they've had. I mean, I know that on this album it's not nearly as centered around the two different guitars, but yeah, I love their aesthetic. That it's very straightforward in nature. Like, like there's not like a ton of like effects on it. Actually, I don't think there's any effects on it except for like when you get to the end, there's like a little bit of like a delay and like reverb. But like great room sounding drums, like that kind of just steady bass line. The guitars are just, it's just like so easy to get locked into like that rhythm, and like it just speaks to like how they could use the instrument as, something that's not as like all over the place and like wackadoo as like, the typical like 1980s guitar approach is like, like, just like noodling everywhere. It's like the antithesis to that, like very rhythm oriented versus like trying to be like, yeah, we're going to like whack off on the guitar and it's going to like go everywhere a million miles an hour. And, but definitely utilizing like the dynamic approach of like, okay, we're going to start off kind of quiet, and then it's going to get loud, and it's going to come back to like quiet, and then kind of like erupt again, like that big like you want to figure it out. It's like it's just a great. I mean, like they did such a good job at like being thoughtful with all these songs, and like it's certainly been a catalog of work that I've tried to study, like in terms of like the way that I write songs.
It's a good example of, not only quiet loud, but just sort of musical tension and release, because
Sure.
they're alternating between these sort of two chords in the verse. I didn't like have a chance to analyze like what they're playing, from a music theory perspective, but it's I mean there's no resolution at all in the verse, right? It's sort of like it always feels like it's building up to something. It's going to land on some note that feels like home, but it puts that off. It doesn't do it until the big chorus comes in.
Right.
So that's a good template for like, smart writing for if you want to have tension and then catharsis.
Sure.
And also they transition between that. Like maybe musically, my favorite part of the song is the verse is ending, and then there's just sort of this guitar note played over and over again, bending up like yeah, and that's something that Fugazi's gone back to a few times in just a smart way to like get that tension right up to the breaking point and burst into a big chorus.
Oh, sure, yeah. Like, I mean, it definitely takes you to the loud part in a way that's very graceful, because you're starting off with like this very tight, like, and then all of a sudden, just like kind of takes you there, and it makes it less abrupt, when you have that big opening during the chorus,
I gotta say, I think your imitations I think that's exactly perfect pitch.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. I think that's exactly the same note as the record.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to this song hundreds of times, man.
I don't think I really like the drum sound on this one. It's kind of like maybe too much reverb for me. It's kind of thin, like a little bit washed out.
Yeah, well, I mean, like their earlier albums, I think actually most of their earlier albums like don't really have like a really high quality drum recording,
Yeah.
Like, it's like there's not like a ton of like really great like production on the drums. I mean, they sound good, at least like for the music itself. But I guess, I don't know though. Like, I don't want to say that it sounds bad either, because I don't want to compare what they do to anything, and it's maybe it's like just a bias thing, but
yeah. It's sort of like the only thing you can compare them to is, themselves on different songs, which is what I usually do.
Well, sure. And like, you kind of take it from album to album. Like In on the Kill Taker is like pretty well thought of as like the guitar album, because like they do so many cool, interesting things with the guitar on that album, and then, like Argument is a little bit more about like kind of coming back to like the lyrics and the songs itself. And like, it's very like different and like kind of dubby. And then, End Hits is another like kind of guitar driven album. And, this album I think has a lot more like stripped down approach to it. But yeah, I mean, every album's got its own unique quality, and, the production level just changes, I mean, to a degree. I mean, there is a level of consistency though, like between them all. Like they all sound like Fugazi,
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're speaking of how much we like the song. It's perfect time to talk ratings.
Do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like me?
So you've heard the podcast before. We rate songs on a scale of 1 to 5 within the context of the Fugazi catalog. How good of a Fugazi song is this? Is Bulldog Front, in your opinion?
On a scale of 1 to 5, I mean, honestly, I would give this song a solid. I'd give it a solid 4. Yeah, it's a song that I come back to all the time. It's not the one that I always come back to, or even like maybe in like the top 10 for me, but but it's a song that I can definitely listen to over and over and over, and I just never really get tired of it. I sing along to it.
Yeah, for me, I think I diverge with you a little on this one. It's not one of my favorites. I've been trying to think of it in the context of, if I were at a Fugazi show and they started playing the song at hand, this one, I wouldn't be too excited about it. I might have to go 2.5. It seems very low, and in discussing it, I have gained more of an appreciation for it, but I got to make tough choices in the course of this podcast, and I think it's going to be 2.5 for this one.
Yeah, and you can't give them all 5s or anything, So, no, I hear you. I mean, like this song off of this album is, one of the ones that I like the most. So, I'm kind of using that as like a degree for the rating. So,
well, hey, if you get around to doing more Fugazi tribute type stuff, maybe a band that you're in should cover this, because I looked up on YouTube. I was trying to find people who did covers of this. There are precious few. I think I found 2. Like, one is a guy who's sort of multi-tracking himself, playing drums, bass, and guitar. The only other one I found had, I think, literally, like, I don't know if it had any views, like 0 thumbs up, 0 thumbs down. So this is not one of those songs that's well known, I would say, in the Fugazi catalog. So it's a golden opportunity for anybody who's a fan of this song and wants to give it a good cover. Go out there and do it.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's I'd be stoked to hear it. The tribute album, when we were putting it together, I reached out to a ton of bands, and so many of them just didn't have the time to really put anything together, and I don't think that anyone really gravitated towards this song. I don't think anyone mentioned it, but it would have been one that I would have been really stoked to hear as well.
Well, don't say any more about the tribute record until I introduce the segment Plugs. And now go. Tell us, where can listeners reach you? What do you want to plug? Where can we get the record? Where can we get anything else that you're involved with?
Hey, great. Yeah. So if you want to check out the Fugazi tribute album, you can learn more about it if you just go to www.selltheheartrecords.com. That's heart like the organ heart, HEART. We also have just our web store, which is just selltheheartrecords.limitedrun.com. We also have it on Bandcamp. So if you just go to sthr.bandcamp.com, you can find it there. If you buy the record either digitally through Bandcamp, which that's the only place that you can buy it digitally, or if you buy it on vinyl, the proceeds that we get from the sale of the record will actually be donated to a charity organization, or it's a nonprofit here in the East Bay called West Oakland Punks with Lunch. They go out and do work in the homeless community out here in the East Bay by providing food and harm prevention. And originally, the proceeds were going to a nonprofit in San Francisco called Taking It to the Streets. But unfortunately, they closed their doors a little over a year and a half ago because they couldn't continue to get funding. We were able to raise a little over $2,300 for them. So we still have, I think the last time I checked, it was like just over 200 copies of the album left. So there's still plenty. Let me know if you want to pick one up and we'll get one to you. And anything else that's going on, we have a couple of other releases through the record label that came out recently. Bay Area band called the Middle Aged Queers, queercore band, a lot of fun. Also another band from the Bay called Unconditional Arms, which is an instrumental post-rock band that you might enjoy. Also, I play in the band Tsunami Bomb. We had an album come out not that long ago that you should check out called The Spine That Binds. And besides that, just check out the label, see what we got coming up, and yeah.
Cool. Well, listener, go into your podcast app and look at details, and I'll put in the show notes all those links that Andy mentioned. Andy Pohl, thanks so much for joining me, talking about Bulldog Front. As for me, you can reach me, as always, at fugaziatoz@gmail.com, and you can join the Facebook group, The Alphabetical Fugazi. give me your 2 cents on this song. And on next week's song, I hope you'll join me for the next episode when we will be discussing Burning. Until then, keep your eyes open.